No. I don't know if it'll work on mine. I can test it out. Mine. Hopefully it'll work. Okay, let it load. This has been so interesting. A lot of different places, sources, approaches, and I appreciate that because Eduardo's in-depth examination of the text is actually someone like looking at the Book of Mormon where people are getting these ideas. It shows, how people are processing, how do they interpret it, ways that people liken scriptures to themselves, right? And some connections that I've never made in my mind or anything like that. But I think even this experience of seeing it made me wonder, okay, what is in the Book of Mormon? What is there? How has it influenced people in different ways? How are they understanding these narratives, these stories of, people that some I've never heard of if you don't read the Book of Mormon, right? Like Lehi and Nephi and Mulek, all these names and people's ideas. So I do appreciate that because what I'm talking about is it's a different approach. I'm trained in history, thinking about what has happened in recent past, I'll say, is really my approach to it. That my work is interwoven with stories of my family, my own upbringing. It's autoethnographic in a lot of ways. And that's been hard and why I actually didn't want to, I was hesitant to approach these studies in these kind of circles because there's so many people out there that have their stories and they've shared them with me. We've had exchanges, conversations, and I don't speak for anyone. I'm really, again, from that standpoint of a lens and the different lenses that I'm trying to move through, but have been influenced by those stories and those windows that they share with me into their lives and experiences. So I just pray and hope that I, in doing them well and treating them well with those stories and experiences they share with me, and some who have their stories and experiences framed in images, right? Like this photograph that is projecting on the screen of dancers during, quote, Indian Week, which was a big part of different programs, movements at Brigham Young University, a university run by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I know that that's what the church wants to officially be called. So for clarity, I'm just going to be referring to the church rather than saying the name out, the full title, but also that emphasis on Jesus Christ and not followers of the Book of Mormon or followers of Joseph Smith, but the emphasis on Christianity and Jesus Christ being really central as well. And again, that varies on people's identities and their beliefs and faith of what Mormon means to them, how they practice that. So sharing a little on myself, in the Nebazad, it's important we introduce ourselves by Donne, our clans. The Nebazad Behosha, I'm learning Navajo language is the first language of Shije, my father, who is a boarding school survivor and who has been through a lot of different experiences. And for whatever reasons, he and like many other relatives we have, they have not taught or speak in the Nebazad with their children. And so this is something very important to us to be in spaces as these questions of language brought up in colonialism. That's again how this relates to all these different contexts and dynamics. She'e bilagana nishle do kia ani bashishchin bilagana dashache do sinijani dashanale akot ego at sa nishle. So I shared that my mother, I am Bilagana of white American, primarily English settler descent through my mom. and I'm born for the Towering House and Blackstreet Woods people clans of Diné. I'm a citizen of the Navajo Nation. And these are important to share because even me sharing that, some people will say, you're not Diné because your mother isn't, or you didn't grow up in this part of Diné Bikaya, or you're not white because you have a Diné father, and all these different dynamics. And then as I share with people, that I was raised going to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, all the kind of ideas, prejudices, concepts, conceptualizations based on people's own experiences, things they've heard, things they've gone through, they lay that on me too, right? So that's why I'm really up here, is because I can name countless instances of just when I say a word about, when people start to ask about me, who I am, of it opens the can of worms. And that there's been many times where I don't even want to say who I am. So it means a lot to be here and be as honest as I can of that positionality. And I have to start there, even if I'm being recorded or live streamed or anything, because that's why I think this voice matters, of just trying to always educate people that whatever they thought about Native Americans, Diné, white Americans, Latter-day Saints, whatever, I don't necessarily fit any or all of that. And I'm sharing these experiences and those of how I'm trying to understand people who have intersections with my own positionality, and they're very different and at different places and coming from different dynamics. So that's always my core lesson as a professor in Native American studies, is even saying we're not all Native American, we're not all Indigenous. These are many different peoples and places, and these efforts of homogenizing us is really harmful. At the same time, this concept of Lamanite, it's also been a word of people finding connections, and same with Native American, even American Indian, a misnomer, right, from Columbus. American Indian movement, what I've met people proud to be Indian, and these dynamics, even if I might cringe knowing that it was Columbus who just said, oh, you're Indian, right? Or I cringe how these terms have been used in different contexts or even their origins. So among Diné, I just want to briefly explain songs and poetry. As we heard, these different words, they have deeper meanings too. And a lot of what we're talking about, it's our identities. And that's so important. And I'm coming from, when I'm talking about and have talked with many diverse peoples who relate as Indigenous, connect with that. I often am thinking about the teachings or the context of Shajeh, my father and my relatives, my Diné relatives. So I put that there, of that I emphasize, from previous works, the importance of Sanagai Bik'ehajon, of walk in beauty, as some roughly translate it, but it means so much more than that. It means living a long life, seeking, that harmony and balance, restoring order from disorder, and symbols, and of how important place is, being mindful of these connections of peoples and places, and helping us to situate ourselves. So in my first book, The Earth Memory Compass, that's that compass of the earth and the mountains, what they teach us, and those layers of Diné teachings. Songs like those that Sharon Birch has popularized in her CDs, Diné Singers, of the sacred mountains, Zith Dayini. So I'm gonna try, you all are gonna have to pull me off to get me back. All right, now in a few minutes to the story of Lamanite generation. I share this because, again, that identity of where I'm coming from. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for BYU, because that's where my parents met. Both of them converts to the church. And my father went to BYU when it claimed to have some of the largest Native American student populations in the world, right, in the country. And my mother was living with Native American woman roommates, and they introduced her to my father. And here I am because of that. What you see up here is some of the primary sources and different materials. So I have, grown up with stories from my family and friends who are family to me, of how close we are, who have had these experiences of going to these different Native American programs like and involved in groups like Lamanite Generation, that was a performance group based on these ideas of who are Lamanites that some of the speakers have talked about earlier. So this is a source actually that was printed by the Alabama Coushatta Indian Reservation, their leaders and community, in 1976, announcing that Lamanite Generation was coming. And the way that they describe it, them coming to perform and do a show at Alabama Coushatta, was they said, it plans for an Indian uprising in East Texas late this spring was revealed by Emmett Batiste, superintendent, second chief of the Alabama Coushatta Indian Reservation. Quote, in keeping with the tradition of the Alabama Coushatta Indian tribes, this will be a friendly one. And the Lamanite Generation, a troop of talented American Indian students from Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, has accepted an invitation to bring their original American Indian variety program here, May 27th, 28th, 29th, 1976. And it goes on. I read more of the different sources about that. But what I was trying to emphasize is there's these sources of, here are Native groups who don't have a strong population of Latter-day Saint Native Americans, but Lamanite Generation in the 70s was not only at BYU, a big thing there, but it was more a kind of ambassador of Latter-day Saint Native Americans and this idea of Lamanite going to different Native nations at that time. Now, you've heard from others and you've seen different images up here, including Lane Johnson's map of who are the Lamanites and these kind of dynamics, and the conversations of even from the founding of the church, right? Lamanite and Indigenous groups, specifically American Indians, at first being equated with Lamanite peoples described in the Book of Mormon text that, Eduardo was looking into. And some of these pictures I'm not going to have time to go into, but it's important to understand in the years that Spencer W. Kimball was an influential leader in the church, he really had a vision that he would uplift and serve Lamanites. And he believed Native Americans, Latin Americans, and Polynesians, and I'm using these conflated terms, but they are ones that have been used historically, so I use them in those historic contexts. He believes groups that were identified in those terms are Lamanites or descendants of Lamanites. And so he invested in and directed and pushed for a lot of programs supporting what he saw were Lamanites. Some of these photos, again, I won't get into them, but they show a collage in a way of the Indian student placement program, where Native American students were placed in Latter-day Saint homes off the reservation. The Southwest Indian Mission, that there were specific Indian missions of the church, and other Indigenous missionaries like Kanaka Maoli missionaries, Maori, Tongan missionaries would go to serve, as the terms were assigned to serve on the Navajo reservation or among different Native American nations. And I've written about that in a chapter in an edited volume by Rinsick and Hafen. So a lot of important works with others in these conversations and dialogues. And George P. Lee being one of the first, not the first, but one of the first high authorities of the church, Dene, who went on the placement program, and images such as this. So I'm going to have to, sorry to make y'all seasick. Again, I'm not going to get into everything. I wanted to really just talk orally with you and won't even get into how this is a work in progress, that I'm trying to understand the history of Lamanite generation and experiences of different people's youth who were involved in that program. But I do have this book that this is a fusion of work from looking at Red Power at BYU and Native American youth activism at BYU. And the book, Dene Gamali, is coming out in October through the University Press of Kansas. So you can even pre-order that. And if people are wondering about like my own faith story, if there's questions about that, co-editors Melissa Neway and the past and beautiful Kate Holbrook, who recently passed, were co-editors of Every Needful Thing that I have a chapter in that delves into that. So much to talk about. So really, I'm going to briefly highlight in this time some images that depict what were Lamanite generation and some quotes that align with those images. Here is Millie Cody with, at the time, President Kimball of the church, and holding up the lyrics of Go My Son, which became a major kind of anthem and motive song about these ideas that Native students, when they come as Lamanites, you know, to Brigham Young at that time in the 60s and 70s, they would blossom as a rose. They would support their people, empower them. And that song, Go My Son, had that idea of you're coming to learn an education and then to go and support your people. Now, keeping in mind that Provo and Utah, where this space is, has always been Indigenous land, where massacres occurred that removed and violence against Utes and Shoshone peoples. And that, you know, was something that wasn't addressed at that time, right? So there's all these kind of walking contradictions and dynamics going on. I'll play that. And this is just a map I put together going back to that 1976 tour that the Lamanite generation went on in one summer of 1976. This is all the places they went to. They went to Ottawa, Montreal, Canada, to Fort Wayne, Indiana, to Philadelphia, to Alabama, Coshada, and San Antonio, all these places in just one summer. And these are groups that every year, you know, have been going on tours in these different places, right? And to share too my own positionality, that I went to BYU. I was a title holder of Miss India and BYU. And this is where it sparked these questions for me. Where did this pageant come from? What is this? There were dozens of women before me who carried that title and that crown. What were their stories? That they were Apache, they were other Dene, Omaha, all these different Native nations. And I was at BYU when there were only a few of us, no longer, you know, over 200, but less than that, and these different dynamics. So that took me to this journey of trying to understand, you know, what were the origins of even those kind of programs? Why were they there? What had happened? And that was, you know, this time of the heyday at BYU, where there was this critical mass of Native American students and unity. And so I have to respect time too. Granted, you're gonna have to read my publications. Anyway, that's my bailout or whatever. There's still so much to talk about, and I feel like I'm just rearing up. And so I will honor that. Let's open up Q&A, and I hope to be in conversation and continue with people. Oh, Angelo, of course, response. Thank you, Angelo.